Okay, I'm going to start out this talk with a quick story. This whole talk is about strategy. And this is, again, something I wished someone had talked to me about early on. We have gotten to the point now where I track our income every week. And I know what my goal is every month. I've decided it before at the beginning of the year. Well, on Monday, I did the calculation of where we were in our February income, and I found that we were going to fall short by about $15,000, which isn't huge for us. We're at an $11 million a year organization, but it's significant. So I said to my team, here's what's going on. I'm tracking something like 17 streams of income really, really closely down to the dollar. And this is what I'm going to message to you in this talk. This is where you can get. But you can't get there right now if you're young and early, but you can start building your way toward it. So I told her on Monday that we were on our team on Monday that we were $15,000. We were going to come up $15,000 short because I could calculate up to today how much we were likely to make. And I don't like that because I report to my executive director and to my board every month whether or not we made our goal. And they follow it very, very closely. So on Tuesday, my team made a plan, and on Wednesday, they raised $19,000. So we made it. We are at a point now where it's still really, really hard. We work, we sweat. I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning a lot about whether or not we're going to be able to fund the lives that we need to save. But it's become really stable and predictable, and I've come to a point where I know we're in trouble long before we're in crisis, and we're able to react to it. So I'm going to show you how I do that, and I'm going to show you the early stages of how I developed this system. This is a system that I developed because I'm not a traditional fundraiser. I figured it out for myself what I needed to do. I'm going to start out with a story which comes from Ellen Jefferson, our executive director. She learned the hard way about strategy and planning. She's a veterinarian. She's the executive director, so she is still responsible for the fundraising, and she still participates in it. In the early days, she did it almost all herself. She had volunteers like me. I was a very early volunteer for APA. But the day that she hired a development director, she was so excited because she's a veterinarian and she's deeply invested in the cause, but she doesn't really enjoy fundraising very much. So time's going by through the year, and she hired a really experienced, really good someone who had been really successful elsewhere. Time's going by, and she's not worried about it, but she's not really paying attention. End of the year. They were in deficit because she wasn't staying on top of it. And it is the responsibility of the executive director and the board to make sure that you are on top of your finances at all times. They are fiscally responsible for the organization, and they had taken their eyes off the ball because they thought somebody had it. This is before my time, by the way. So general rules of thumb for executive directors or anybody who's ultimately responsible for your fundraising, is that you should be spending around 11% of your income on fundraising. If you're not, you should be investing more in it. That's just a general rule of thumb. You need roughly a single paid person per $500,000 in your budget. That's not a hard and fast rule. That's just sort of a general rule of thumb. But if you're a small organization, you should start thinking about hiring your first development person as you get up to about $500,000. Before then, it's the board and the executive director who are primarily responsible for working on fundraising, and they usually do that with a lot of volunteers to help. But her message to other executive directors and boards is that trust your development team, but always verify. And so we have built that caution into our system, our strategy for fundraising. So what you're doing is you're not only watching the money, because sometimes you're working on fundraising that isn't going to deliver money for months and months out, but you're making sure that those activities that are supposed to be happening are happening. So what's in this presentation? I'm first going to just touch on the typical funding sources that you see at each growth stage in a small to medium nonprofit. I'm going to talk about prerequisites to good funding strategy because I'm going to show you the thing that people neglect the most in nonprofits and the thing that they should not neglect at all if they ever want to be strong in their fundraising. And we're going to talk about the strategy planning process that I've created. And what I want you to take away from that is not that you have to follow that process, but it shows you how much you need to anticipate and plan and stay on top of things constantly. I'm going to show you the importance of tracking your progress and then how you react if you have a shortfall like I did last week. So this is not anything hard and fast, but these are typically where you're getting money. In the early stages, over here, I guess that's your left, your staffing is usually all volunteers and executive directors, and as you build, you're hiring more people. And it isn't going to be the same for everybody who you're hiring. If you live in a town where events make a lot of money, which they don't in Austin, then you should be hiring an events manager fairly soon, and because that's an opportunity. You can focus on events. If you're not in a town, that's not a position that you hire early on. But you can see there's this march of progress, things that you do when you're small, things that you add, things that you drop, staffing that you add, and then you also want to invest in technology down at the bottom. And these are not hard and fast rules at all, and I just kind of threw this together, and it's sort of the rhythm of how your fundraising grows and what you need to invest in. Anyone have a question about that? Okay, the prerequisite for really good fundraising strategy is good financial reporting. When I first started volunteering at APA, I came on as a grant writer, as a volunteer back in early 2009, a few months after they had started. And they were growing really rapidly in their mission, but nobody was fundraising. And I already had skills as a grant writer from elsewhere, so I came in, but I was writing grants for myself in academia. I wasn't writing them for an organization. And I didn't understand at that time that there's this whole context of success that you have to build around any kind of fundraising, including grant writing. And the primary thing you need is to be on top of your finances. And I'm going to show you why. So the thing that is really, really hard for nonprofit people to get in their early stages and what they tend to neglect is a bookkeeper or a person with very simple accounting experience. But I can't emphasize enough how important it is. When I started writing grants, I quickly realized I didn't have any of the financial reporting I needed, and I told the executive director, I can't write grants for you until you have this person in place. It took her 6 months to get them in place. She kept nagging me about writing grants, and I kept telling her, I'm not going to write any grants until you've got that person, because I'm going to put all that work into it, and it's still going to fail. So she finally did get it. I got this guidance from our finance director. Until you're about at a $2 million budget, you don't need a finance director, a really advanced finance person. You need somebody who has some accounting background, maybe a volunteer, maybe a board treasurer who is a volunteer, maybe someone on your staff is just willing to keep your books for you. But this is what the basic function, that they're carrying out. They only need to help you occasionally. All they need to do is, gather up all your income and all your expenses and balance it out on your books and close out your books every month. That's all. Once a month. It's a day's work if you're really small. They need to do your 990, and then they need to create basic budgets for you. And I would urge all of you, if you don't have software for your accounting, get it. It will save you so much time and labor. A person without much background at all in finance can do your books on QuickBooks. It's got a lot of guidance in it for you. So these are the kinds of financial reporting you need in your early days, and this is sort of sequential. At the beginning, at the minimum, you need someone who will fill out your 990. This is your IRS form. If you register as a nonprofit, you get all that paperwork done. You know, it's a lengthy process, and you don't file a 990 for 3 years, your status as a nonprofit is canceled automatically. So you do not want to go through that. The form becomes more and more complex as you get bigger and have more to report. But this is extremely important, and your 990 can be your only financial document if you're at that very early stage where you're just struggling to keep afloat, but you have to have it. Really important is an annual operating budget, and that's just an outline of your expenses and your revenues, and it's a projection. You do it at the beginning of the year, you figure out roughly what you need to spend, roughly what kind of money you're going to bring in, and you make it balance out on a single piece of paper. It's very simple. I used to make them, even though I'm not a finance person, because I was so desperate to apply for grants and they were all asking for them. So I finally did it myself. And then very early, you're going to start needing a profit and loss statement, either an annual one at the end of the year to show what you actually raised. So this one, keep doing that. This one is a projection. This one is actual. So you're showing what you actually raised, what you actually spent, and often grant makers or savvy donors will ask for, well, where are you right now? It's April, where are you year to date? So that's why you need that finance person closing out your books every month. The gold standard for finances in nonprofit world is the audited financial statement. I have a slide that I moved to the end of this because I don't know if I have time to go over audits, but is anybody interested in audits? We can talk about it at the end. It's a big question because there's this catch-22 where it's really expensive to get an audit, but you've got to have it if you're going to grow. So I will cover them at the end. I have a slide that is pretty detailed about it. I'm breaking all the rules on PowerPoint. My slides are really complicated and I have a lot of stuff thrown on them because I expect that you're going to take pictures of them. So if you're struggling with getting good financial reporting in place, here's a few tips. There are some free and low-cost ways that you can get someone to handle your finances. One is a community foundation will often offer this as an inexpensive service. It depends on your community foundation. So if you don't have an accountant or a bookkeeper, call them up, ask them if they offer that. There's always volunteers around who might want to do it. If they're a retired business person, that's golden. They got lots of time and they know how to do it. Business school interns might be able to do it for a short time. And you should build your way towards success. If you're just telling yourself, well, that intern's only going to be with me for 3 months, well, that's at least 3 months of good financial reporting. That's a good start. The treasurer on your board might be able to provide this. That's pretty common for your volunteer treasurer to provide your financial reports for your first few years. And if nothing else, you can hire a part-time consultant, right? It's 1 day a week. That's all you need, plus the $9.90. There is a thing called a capacity building grant. Those are grants that invest in the growth of and the stability of your nonprofit. They're not for programming. There are foundations out there who are aware that we're all struggling with this business end of our nonprofits, and they have funds to help with that, and they're called capacity building grants. I've never found one for animal welfare. It's because our community foundation doesn't have one that is extended to people in animal welfare, but other community foundations do. You might be able to find one in your community. Also, TechSoup.org, does everybody know what that is? It is a great organization. You can buy really, really cheap software licenses there. QuickBooks is fairly expensive, but you can get it for $60 for one license on QuickBooks, as long as you can prove to them that you're a nonprofit. You can also get Microsoft Office for $5. Okay, this is where you're headed. And this is what is the basis of the system that I've developed for my strategic planning around funding. So our finance director, who's got a very close eye on our finances, did this deep dive into our fundraising. And she averaged out where we get our money, individual contributions, corporate donations, events, and grants. how much we got of our annual income by percentage every month. So this is where I start. Every year I project our income for the next year. This is where I start. Because she found that from year to year, no matter what we're doing, this is a pretty regular pattern. And so I know, because of this, where my opportunities are and where I don't want to throw a lot of effort at fundraising. That's the time of the year when I do more strategic planning or engagement or something other than asking people for money. So you can see it. It's January, February, and July. I can beat my head against that reality all day long. I am not going to raise a lot of money in those months. When am I going to raise money? December, the end of the year. That is a golden opportunity. Use it. Ask for money every single day in December in some way or another. Really. We ask for money every single day in December. So is every other nonprofit that's savvy about it in the world. Don't get left behind. Ask, ask, ask. It is when people want to be asked. So in 2018, down to the dollar, I projected how much I would raise from every stream of income. And we have met our fundraising goals, or we have actually exceeded our fundraising goals every single year. We are never in the red. And it's because I've developed this really tight system where I have a really tight eye on our income. And I don't always know at the beginning of the year that I can actually raise $146,149 in July from individual donations, but that's a goal. And I know it's a goal in January, so I'm working on that goal in January so that it becomes true in July. So you are not going to be at this point yet if you're a young nonprofit because you don't have enough of a history probably of your financial reporting. You don't know how to predict yet, but this is why you want to be so careful about getting good financial reporting early in your history. So this is the process you go through, and I'm going to show you how you can go through it when you're really small, and it's a really abbreviated process because I know you don't have time. When I first came on board and we were at 3 million, which is still a fairly small nonprofit, I was just working, hanging on by my fingernails to keep up. I started my job in June. We were $1 million in the hole at that point, and I was just trying to survive. It was a mad scramble. But ever since that year, I am working at one level to make sure that we're raising the money we need in the short term, but I am always setting aside a few hours every week to plan for the long term. So, when you start this strategic process, any fundraising, you have to have a goal. How do you have a goal? How do you know how much you need to raise for a year? What's your expenses? So every year, our finance director and our executive director go out to the whole shelter and talk about what they need and what they've spent, and they know what expenses to predict, and they come up with a total, and they tell me how much we're going to spend that year. We build in a little to build up a reserve fund. They tell me that's what you need to fund, and I don't have any choice about it. And every year they deliver it to me, and for about 2 days I'm in a total panic, because I don't know how I'm going to raise that. But this process tells you how you're going to raise it. So you set your goal, and it can be as easy as, I need to raise $1,000 for a dog's surgery. You can use this process for that, or you can use it for your whole year of fundraising at any level. I'm using this at the level that we're at right now. So we saw that our expenses rose by 12%. That means you have to raise 12% more money. Calculate that. How much is that? There's your goal. It's that easy. So early days, this is the actual strategy plan for APA in 2008. The top line, that grant writer, that's me. Everybody on this chart is a volunteer, except the executive director. It says we're reporting to the fundraising director. That was very ambitious. They never were able to hire a fundraising director. It was the executive director who acted as the fundraising director. That's who we were reporting to. I used to bring her grant proposals, and she would duck out of surgery, because she's a vet, and sign the proposal, and then go back in, because your executive director has to sign your grant proposals. So all this does is make your fundraising, it's just a plan. It's very simple. You flesh out this plan until this column adds up to $75,000. So you're saying, who is working? What are they doing? Who are they reporting to? What is their very precise performance metrics? And so this was midstream. This is not a completed plan, but I knew that I had to apply for enough grants to get 3 in the door. So you just keep working, you add details. All strategic planning is anticipating your needs and mapping it out. Okay, so this was an example that was brought to me by a young nonprofit last year who came to this conference. And they had made most of their money through Facebook campaigns. What's the problem with Facebook campaigns? Oh, it takes forever to get the money, and they don't give you the donor information. It's very frustrating. I've had donors call me up and said, I gave you $300 last month and you didn't thank me. And I'll say, well, how did you give it to us? And they say, well, I donated to a Facebook campaign. I will say, well, actually, you donated to Facebook, and they didn't tell me who you were. And they say, oh, okay. But I was lucky that that person called me. How many of them didn't call me, and how many of them got angry and went away forever? I don't know. So that is not a plan to grow on. That's 62.5 for Facebook. So I sat down with them and I said, this is how you do a strategy plan to grow on. You need to raise 14% more. How much is that? I calculated if you just did the same thing in this middle column. I'm sorry, this laser thing isn't working. That's just a benchmark. It doesn't mean anything. It's not reality right there, but it's sort of a guidepost for you. So I told them, you need to stop focusing on your fund, because they were spending all their staff time promoting Facebook campaigns. And I said, you're never going to grow on that. But those people who work on Facebook campaigns have a particular skill set. Use that skill set. Go to crowdfunding. It is the same skill set. Shift your work from Facebook and get your donor data through a crowdfunding platform. Crowdfunding platforms like Mighty Cause, you can do a campaign on there, and they will deliver the money, and they will deliver all the donor information. And now you've started an email list so that you can start building your own list of donors.
Why does Mighty Cause?
It's privacy.
Okay.
Of all the companies in the world worried about privacy.
What's the name of it? Mighty Cause?
Mighty Cause is one of these platforms. There's GoFundMe. We don't use GoFundMe because they charge 8% fees. Mighty Cause is about 3 or 4, maybe 5. There's a couple of fundraising platforms that charge no fees at all to animal welfare. You can Google them. Sorry? Right, exactly. So these are the other streams of income that they're breaking down their challenge. They've got to raise $114. You don't tear your hair out and say, hide your head in the sand and say, I don't know how I'm going to do that. I'm just going to kind of jump in and do it. You make a plan. You break down the challenge so that you can predict where you're going through the year. So they got a new grant writer, so now they can start adding in grant income, right? It's not going to be 0. It's going to be 9,000. And they knew that because they had talked to their grant writer, and they knew that they had enough capacity there to raise about that much. They knew that they were growing. That's why they needed 14% more money. So they knew they were going to hold more adoption events, and they knew that they had donation jars in there. So it was pretty clear to them that they could probably make more than 14% on their donation jars. Unsolicited, that's probably funds that are coming into your website. When you're young and early, you often don't know who your donors are or how they got there, but they are donating. So the way that you drive up unsolicited donations is what? If you were here last time, engage, inspire. So they made a plan because they had a new volunteer who loved to do PR and had media contacts. So they decided that they would have their PR person get a story in the local news every month. That was her goal. That was her KPI. So they knew that they could probably raise at least 14% more from unsolicited donations. And so this is how you do it. You think about, what do I have available to me? Every one of you out there, no matter how young and small you are, has resources available to you. Those are your opportunities. Use your opportunities. Your fundraising is going to differ from everybody else's. Is this all clear to everybody? Any questions about it? Okay, you're not done when you've done that table, but you then make a table for everybody involved in the fundraising, and you set expectations for activities, especially for something like grant writing. As I said earlier, sometimes you're doing stuff where you know it's going to result in revenues, but you don't know for many, many months. And you need to stay on top of that and make sure your grant writer is carrying out the activities that are going to result in the expected income. Don't just trust that it's going to happen. Over and over, people will disappoint you. And by the time you find out if you're not following their expected activities, is that it's too late to make up for lost time. So you set up KPIs. With grants, it's really difficult to set monthly goals because there's a lot of external factors around it, but you can set quarterly goals. And so this grant writer is expected in the first quarter to look up 12 sources of grants, because we estimated that it would take 12 sources to reach the 9,000. And they were told how many proposals they had to submit, and the executive director would ask, did you submit your 2 proposals this quarter? Yes, good. You usually estimate income with grants on a percentage of possibility. So say you're applying for a $10,000 grant. You've never applied to that grant maker before. You don't have a lot of performance metrics to show them. Your chances of getting that grant are pretty slim. So you don't estimate that you're going to get $10,000. You estimate that maybe you have a 10% chance of getting them. 10% of $10,000 is $1,000. That's how I do grant projections. This is how a lot of grant managers do grant projections. So you never be hopeful. Your fundraising expectations should be reasonable. Otherwise, you've walked yourself into a crisis. Any questions? Okay, so this is a summary at the early stage. You set a reasonably accurate goal. You break down the challenge by income stream. You match resources and staff to that. Back in that early example of breaking down the challenge, when you do crowdfunding, you're going to pay fees. So I estimated that if they used Mighty Cause and they were charging about 5% fees, if they were raising $21,000 on that platform, that it would cost them that much in fees. If you have expenses to your fundraising, you have to add them into your revenue goals. Right? The other money is for saving lives. This is for funding your fundraising. Okay, this is at a bigger stage. So this person, this is all hypothetical. This is not a real chart. It's just one that I put up for example. This organization needs to raise $1.228 million that year. And so this is how you start to create a system where you can be very strategic and predictable about your fundraising. Everything here in this buff yellow color is something you're certain about. So you start filling this in with what you're certain about. So you're dividing it out by month. These buff colored ones are just math. There's Excel formulas in there, so that as you're filling in this middle part, you can see it adding up to where you need to be. So you fill out what you know. We know we have a sponsor. We know we're going to have a plan that's going to increase our sponsorships there. Nothing is ever certain. These are goals, right? And you're going to plan activities around them. And then you start plugging in more and more. You're going to come to a point where you don't know, really. At that point, you're putting amounts in there that you are going to work to that goal. Does that make sense? You look a little confused. It gets really scary at that point. Every time I deliver this filled out sheet to my board, I'm like, why aren't they asking more questions? To me, this looks really scary. But it's not scary. When you've broken it down this far, you have a lot of predictability and goals. And if you're not making these goals, you can react sooner than later. Does this make sense to everybody? Yes?
I see it as you're going through the year, you're changing from the forecast to the actual.
Yeah, as I go through the year, so this one, I used to not be able to do my projections until February, and by then I knew what I had actually raised. As I go through the year, I insert a column after each month with my actual so that I can see, I can see forecast against actual.
Gotcha, so you don't have, it's not like you're changing it.
Right,
So
and then, exactly. And then at the bottom here in the green, you can see the percentages. Those are what you can predict of the percentage of income, of the yearly income you will make that month. Now this never works out exactly as you put it in here in the beginning of the year, because all kinds of weird stuff can happen. Or you lose a team member. It's really bad to lose a team member because you're based on relationships, and that person walks out the door with all your relationships. So that's why you want to retain staff too. Keep your staff happy. I lost staff this year, and we had a pretty huge shortfall in October because of it. But I could predict it, and I could make it up, and I did. So the red here are the goals that you're trying to reach. And you're just adding until this total shows up there. That is your plan. That's the main document in my funding strategy. I'm also writing up documents that say what my assumptions are for the year so that I can remember what they were in July. But this works really well. We've been able to make our fundraising really, really predictable. You're not done there. And this is a method at the early stages of development. I don't use this anymore because I got way too much activity going on. But this is a method I learned. I was, for a time, learning social enterprise, and I learned this from the tech world. This is a way of planning timelines. So what you're trying to do is assess your workload from week to week and make sure it's feasible. So this is, you lay out a month across a wall. We use those big Post-it stickies. We put out the whole year so that it's visible. And then we give each team member, the events manager, the donor relations manager, the corporate manager, a different color of sticky. And we block out what we know is going to happen. So we know this day of giving happens in the first weekend of March every year. We raise a significant part of our income from that. We know when events are happening. Whatever we know is happening is written in ink. Everything else is on a Post-it. So if yellow is our events manager, she is working backwards to predict when she has to do things. So she knows that we're having an event out in September. She knows, for instance, that she had better find a venue by around now. She knows that she needs to create her sponsorship package here. She knows she needs to know that that needs to get sent out to possible sponsors there. And I can see instantly if there's too much work in any one week, and we may change our planning around that. This is a really powerful method to set out your timelines and to make sure that what you're planning is feasible. So after we finish this exercise, we take pictures of it, and then we write out a calendar of activity through the whole year, and that goes together with the revenue projections. So it's really simple, it's really common sense, anybody can do it. We used this until we were at about 6 million a year, and then it got to be not a great system. Now we have a much more complicated system of calendaring activity. So every month a table is delivered to our board, and I have to go to the board meeting and report on it. So this is a really nice one. It's a lot of green. The only thing that we've not done well at, and it wasn't much of a problem at all, was corporate. So you see the red. There are months when we go and there's a sea of red there. That's not a great meeting for me. My board is very understanding, but they expect me to react if that's happening. And my executive director expects me to react very quickly if that is happening. And that's good. That's supportive. If your board is really interested in what you're doing, you can even ask them for help, right? They're not always going to help you. They're busy, but the more that you can build anticipation and predictability into your fundraising, the stronger and your whole organization will be. Because we can plan ahead now. My organization feels pretty confident that I'm going to meet my goals, or that if they need a ton of money in October, that I'm going to deliver it. And so it is much more stable. They can plan much more better. The whole operation works better because we have this really tight system of predictability. And so we report where we are for the month. We also report where we are for the year, because sometimes you might fall behind in a month, but you might have done really well in the previous month, so you're still okay for the year. So it's this side of the chart that the board is watching. So what if there's a sea of red in there? And this happened to me in October. I lost a bunch of staff, and we fell behind because it's inevitable when people walk out the door and take relationships with them that your fundraising is going to suffer. You look to what is really working well. You sit down with your team and you talk about, or if it's just you sit down and you think about what's going well. Do more of that. What's not going well? Stop doing it. You stop doing it because you need to spend time on what is an opportunity. You have to get a little brave about it. Sometimes there's something you've always done, but it's not producing a lot of money. Stop doing it. We had a campaign this year to raise $25,000, and it was called Raise a Day, because we spend $25 a day. We have to raise $25,000 a day, every single day, holidays and weekends included. If we fall behind, it's really hard to catch up. And so I tell my team, we have to raise $25,000 today. If they are doing anything that is not producing income, I tell them to stop it, because you are losing an opportunity to raise money. This is how tightly you need to control your fundraising as you get bigger. If you're overwhelmed, you don't have enough people, recruit volunteers. It does work. People, if you tell them, we really need volunteers to help us for just a few weeks, they will respond. Alert your board. Bring them in to help. Your board is responsible for making sure that you are fiscally sound. It is in their interest to come and help you. Focus on activities that have good short-term results, because if you're falling behind, you need money fast. So don't depend on that donor that you're going to have to talk to for a year before they deliver a big gift. Focus on campaigns that are going to bring in money in the short term. You can also look to, if you've been really good about engaging your donors, you can look to the bigger ones and just say, you don't want to tell them that you're desperate. Nobody likes to be part of something that's not successful. Tell them that they have an opportunity, a really great opportunity to help now. Be positive about it, and they will respond. And then you set up triage plans. So that's just a little short-term plan to respond to an emergency. And as often as you can, pursue media. We were once told by a local news station that we had been kind of apologetic about bothering them with stories about animals, and they were like, oh no, animal stories are what build audiences. We would like you to deliver a story to us every single day. We might not use it, but we appreciate it when you give us stories. When you have good media, your fundraising rises. So in October, our revenues had fallen behind by 5%, and that doesn't sound big, but that is important. It was something like $350,000. That's a lot of positions, that's a lot of animals that aren't going to make it if you can't raise that money. So our executive director, who has learned to watch carefully, required a reaction. She told me, I gathered the teams. We work with development marketing together to fundraise, and we sat down and we mapped out a plan. For every activity that we planned, we mapped out how much we could raise from it, how much we thought we could raise from it. And then we went out and we assigned specific people to be responsible for each plan, and they went out and did it. Some of our plan was to just get bolder with some of our donors. Instead of, if they had given us $1,000 at the end of the year every year, we would call them up and say, hey, we're growing, our life saving is growing, we'd really appreciate it if you'd raise your gift to $1,500. And maybe they'd come in at that and maybe they wouldn't, but we did raise a lot of money that way. We didn't cannibalize what they would usually do at the end of the year. We didn't just ask them to give their gift earlier, we asked them to give more. And they did. We also planned new activity, and so we had never done this holiday kennel sponsorship. We'd always sold, I call it sold sponsorships, where people can sponsor a kennel for $1,000 a year. They always moved really slowly, and we'd always wondered, what if it was cheaper? And we all know that at holiday time, a lot of people don't want to give gifts to people who have too much. They want to give something meaningful, like donate to a cause in your name. And so we reduced the price of our kennel sponsorships to $250. We offered them as a gift card so that you could give a card that looked like this to someone, and then we put that card also on a kennel to publicize and honor somebody whose gift had been made. We sold $40,000 worth of holiday sponsorships in 3 weeks. So what we did was we got smart and we thought about, what do we do already? Can we do that better? What is going wrong with something? Can we do it better? Let's test something. Let's do anything because we have to catch up. At the end of December, we had tripled our fundraising that month because we had this plan. We reacted sooner than later. We assigned people direct responsibility for fundraising goals, and they went out and worked to goals. And they did amazingly well. So, what strategic planning can do for you? First of all, it gives you a comprehensive view of your challenge. And that's really important because you can kind of stand above it and get very strategic about what you're going to do. It makes the challenge feel manageable because you've broken it down into pieces that are manageable. It ensures you're going to have the right staffing. So as you're planning activities, you're going to think, oh, I need this technology if I'm going to do that, or I need a staff person like that, or I don't have any money for a staff person, so I need to go out and recruit a specific kind of volunteer, right? If you're planning this in the beginning of the year, you're going to have that in place by the end of the year. It might take you some time, but it will eventually work out if you make it a goal. It ensures that you're planning for the right scale of activity. I once advised a nonprofit that was in real crisis. They had to raise $300,000 in the next 3 months or they were going to actually close and go under. So their fundraising team was sent up to talk to me, and I said, okay, what have you got planned? And they were very resentful that they had to come talk to me. They were like, we got it. I said, okay. I put them on the Post-it activity, and I said, okay, map out what you've got. And they said, well, we're going to do it all through adoption events, and we're going to bring donation jars and Square, and we're going to take donations at our adoption events. And I said, okay, lay it out, add it up, $12,000. Yeah. They didn't go under. They had a new plan by the end of their time with me. So that is the most important thing about it. Fundraising is a gift economy, right? It's very unpredictable. No matter how much you work on this kind of strategy, there's still so much that can change. A relationship can go sour easily because you neglected something. And so what this does most of all is it gives you time to react before you get into a crisis.